Okay, so we'd like to begin the Brabant Lecture. Brabant Lecture Award is granted by the International Institute of Administrative Science to an individual for his or her contribution to the advancement of the public governance discipline, named after Guy Brabant, the IIAS past president and director general. For this year, IIAS Scientific Committee, PRAC, Program and Research Advisory Committee, has decided to award Professor Shamsul Haq as an Brabant Lecturer 2023, thinking about the theme of this year's conference, the developmental state. Professor Shamsul Haq is a professor at the National University of Singapore and Deputy Director of the International Review of the Administrative Science. Professor Samuel Haq has a PhD from the University of Southern California and has extensively published on development theory, public governance, public sector reform, accountability, privatization, environmental politics, and globalization and the state. Professor Haq has undertaken critical assessment of the concepts and the practices of development and emphasized the contextual elements and the non-economic aspect which determine the nature of the development. Professor Haq's major book publication include the Restructuring Development Theory and the Policies, a critical study in 1999, Handbook of Development Policy Studies in 2004, Asian Leadership in Policy and Governance in 2015, and Democratizing Public Governance in Developing Nations with special reference to Africa in 2017. In addition, Professor Haq was the editor of the special issue of the International Review of the Administrative Science, recently in 2021, on the building capacity for development, the administrative dimension in Asia, and analyzed the concept of the state capacity and the nature of the development state, focusing on the administrative capability, which is very relevant to the theme of this year's conference. And I'm very much looking forward to and delighted that we can have a lecture by Professor Haq on the developmental state for the sustainable development. So we are a little bit late, but we have 1 hour, so I'd like to have lecture by Professor Haq, then have a small time for discussion. So Professor Haq, floor is yours, please.
Thank you for your kind words. Thank you very much. Thank you. Light may go off so that it's going to screen. Okay, thank you. Okay, all right, thank you. Okay. All right, thank you very much. Actually, I did not prepare the PowerPoint, but now I'm actually using the PDF file, but he's helping me. This is nice, actually. All right. So anyway, I can see the title of my presentation is Achieving Sustainable Development Through Developmental States in the 21st Century. So it's a very similar to, thematically very similar to the previous discussion. So before I start my presentation, I like to say a few things, just a few words about Guy Brabant. That is his name. This lecture is designated. So it is very an honorable thing to deliver a lecture in the name of Guy Maurice Brabant, who was born in 1927 and died in 2008. So he's excellent professional and provided lots of academic service in the field of public administration. And in his 8 years of life, he left behind the memory of his devoted professional career, reaching up to the level of a membership of the Council of State. Guy Brabant was an example how practical administrative experience can be essential to make valid contribution theoretically, academically. He was very seriously devoted in studying public administration, teaching public administration, and administrative law, often with a comparative perspective. He made significant contribution to International Institute of Administrative Science, that is the organizer of the conference, right? And he was the Director General from 1979 to 1981, and became elected President of IIAS in 1988 to 1992. And one of his admired, Gerard Timsit, actually his publication came in IIAS, and he mentioned that Guy Brabant's friends believed that actually he was a kind of monument of administrative law. So in the tradition of French governing system, so Guy Brabant strongly believed that the state is very critical, crucial to guide public administration, to shape the nature of administrative law. I would say that this has been missing in public administration field, but I'm very happy to that this conference organized related to the state formation, nature of the state is very, very beautiful. Most of the writing in public administration, public policy is very instrumental, managerial. There is no relationship between state and public administration. Although public administration is fundamental, integral part of the state, but state is very, very crucial. That's why I think that conference is relevant to introduce Guy Brabant here. That is the tradition. So I'm also very happy that I wanted to have this perspective that public administration differ from country to country because of the nature of state formation. Communist state, capitalist state, developmental state, all this state, definitely public administration. So it is very, very crucial to have the state-centric perspective. So let me go to my own presentation. First of all, the issue is that introduction, I would say that there's tremendous amount of intensive understanding and intensive priority given to the issue of sustainable development. So I will try to explain the topic. First half will be sustainable development. The second half I'll bring to the question of developmental state. Actually, developmental state is a very complex topic. It's extremely complex. It's not the way often we understand. So that's why it's very important to understand exactly what developmental state is. You know, the different countries in East Asia, lots of scholarship on developmental state. So the reason why sustainable development became very critical issue is the growing, worsening situation of diverse environmental disorder, carbon emission, global warming, deforestation, biodiversity loss, air pollution, ozone depletion, sea level rise, land losses, forest fire. There is no end. There is a growing concern about this sustainable development and environmental sustainability. So because of this, we see that largest meetings, summits in the world, began 1972, then 1992, then 2002 again. Sorry, because of this, all these meetings and summits are attended by almost every country in the world. And that led to the production of many, or introduction of many conventions, protocols, treaties in the name of environmental sustainability. So because of this has become very crucial. And some of the example here you can see that things like Vienna Convention for Protection of Ozone Layer, Montreal Protocol, then UN Framework Convention of Climate Change, Kyoto Protocol, Paris Agreement. So there is no end, continuously pursued by United Nations and other organizations. I just hear some, I think I also requested my presentation to be disseminated among all the participants, all of you, so that you have a chance to have a look at it. So I've just classified some convention and protocol in the name of climate change. Then some are air and water pollution. Some have this hazardous waste, deforestation, ozone depletion, land degradation. So there are lots of conventions. And this convention, to implement them, to enforce this convention, there are lots of institutions are built. It's international institution, and these are supranational organizations, often attached to United Nations. In addition to that, there are also regional organizations created, adopted, different. A good example is Southeast Asia. I just give an example. Many treaties, resolution, action plans taken by regional organizations. Whether EU, OECD or NAFTA or ASEAN, there are many regional organizations. Then you have also national level, every country in the world has this ministry, agency created and active for protecting the environment, the name of environmental protection. And beyond that, at the local level, NGOs, the thousands of NGOs, there could be a million actually environmental NGOs globally. So these are also involved in taking care of the environmental concern. But question is, despite all these convention, protocols, institutions, initiative, discussion, but what is the real scenario? From 1970, it's almost 50 years. And within 50 years, exactly what is the outcome of this initiative, discussion? What is the real outcome, real consequence? Is there an achievement, good achievement, or very, very important question, right? So, sorry. And I was exploring the whole report literature. I found tremendous amount of disappointments in terms of the lack of achievements in sustainable development. And this is indicated by varieties of continuing environmental catastrophe, environmental crisis, whether it's global warming or ozone depletion, or whether it is land degradation, water contamination, So all kinds of problems that still continue, sometimes worsening. Biodiversity loss is a big problem in Southeast Asia, East Asia. Tremendous extinction of all these rare animal and plant species, for example. So tremendous amount of continuity in worsening the situation of environmental disorder globally on different parts of the world. And because of this, the significant studies conducted, critical study, and this interesting table, you can see at the United Nations actually news, UN News actually publishes sorts of things on this issue. And I found it very interesting, 1970 to 2019, during this time, number of catastrophe, environmental disaster in Africa, Asia, South America, North Central America, Europe. So the exactly number of disasters that happened, and the number of people died, sometime close to 1 million, one catastrophe. Some of the, like for example, in Asia. Then cost, in the economic cost, like billions or trillions of dollars. It's tremendous impact, and because of these findings, some of the critical scholars, they're very disappointed with this MDG. Before SDG came, from 2000 to 2015, were Millennium Development Goals. In these goals, Goal 7 is exactly about sustainable development. But achievement has not been really, as expected. Then SDG came from 2016 beginning. Now, some scholars, what they did, based on the existing data, based on the lots of understanding studies conducted, and then they found that the projected outcomes of SDG by 2030, what will be the outcome, exactly the situation, how it will be. And found the projected outcome based on previous trends, that 17 goals of SDG, out of that, most of them got maximum B, some of them got C grade, some D, and more Fs failed. That means the expectation is that the likelihood after the end of the time period of SDG, there's a less likely that they will achieve the goal or 17 goals. Grades are, projected grades are very, is not very impressive, right? So, as a result, the question remains that what is exactly the causes of this environmental underperformance and what are the alternatives? From my understanding and my studies on this issue, what I find is that one of the main problems is that all the United Nations, all the organizations involved, the priority given in this discourse and debate on this issue has been often less significant, not really important issue, like what is causing this environmental disorder. One cause is population pressure. Population pressure means we figure at the developing countries, there are too many people. But there is something like overconsumption, things like this. So there is lots of issues brought in that are really root cause of environmental problem. So root causes are often ignored. The root causes of environmental catastrophe or unsustainability is not paid attention to. One of the main reasons could be that is the problem. Even the sustainable development as a concept, lots of debate was going on this previous session, very interesting. Actually, there are lots of controversy about ecocentric, anthropocentric, dualistic, many approaches to sustainable development. Often, there's a criticism that we talk about intergenerational continuity of development, but how about within same generation, our generation, current moment, some people have too much, some people have less, within our own generation. So there is no inter-class, inter-group kind of consideration. So 20, 100 years later, what will happen? So which is a good thing. I'm just saying that there is a need for understanding this particular dimension. So I would say one of the most critical consideration root cause of environmental catastrophe or unsustainability is first of all, the craze for economic growth. The whole world, even including SDG and MDG, even WCD report came, Our Common Future, that is the 1987. So all this report and published, basically, economic growth remains still central. So economic growth with sustainable consumption, economic growth with sustainable production, but growth never compromised. And this is one of the main concerns, economic growth at any cost. Industrialize as much as you can, urbanize as possible, and the main factor behind this sustainable development is this particular issue. So as a result, I think that we have to really look at the root causes of the sustainable problem. Second question is inequality. Inequality is tremendous impact on environmental health. And rich people, elite people, financially very affluent people, they consume things that is environmentally detrimental. Poor people, on the other hand, out of no choice, they go to overexploit, overcultivate, overgraze, overfishing, because no choice. They're burning forest, deforestation, just to get some land to cultivate. Rich farmer, they're producing cash crop for the exports, things like that. So there's a tremendous amount of inequality. It's very interesting that World Economic Forum just happened this month or last month. So there is a Oxfam International, the present report published in January this year, Oxfam International, about inequality. It's tremendous, shocking level of inequality. If you look at that richest 1% of the world today, their income went up during this COVID-19 for the last 3 years. It's by tremendous amount that the 2/3 more than the whole world population. Just 1%, the remaining world population. In UK, richest 1% are more wealthier than the remaining 99%. In Philippines, India, Nigeria, I was looking at this, very interesting amount of inequality that came today is beyond imagination. And this inequality definitely lots of catastrophe because consumption, production, rich people, affluent people, poor people, exit is very, very crucial. So I'm just saying there are some root causes should be explored. We cannot just leave it alone and just things will get over, and we discuss a lot. So it's one of the issues that we have to think about. Then, because of this situation, so there is a kind of consideration. This environmental convention, protocol, rules, institutions are built by the stakeholders. Supranational institutional United Nations, regional, national government, right? And then we have also the grassroots organization, NGOs, all of them. The question is, for resolving this issue, addressing this problem, do we prefer to have state as the main actor, or NGOs as the main actor, or United Nations should be doing all this, or World Bank or somebody? So because of this, the institutional choice is very crucial. And from my study, what I found, there are lots of critical concern about NGOs. NGOs are very powerful. Anywhere there's a meeting, NGOs already rising up. So often they compromise with the business sector, NGOs. So it's very difficult to make NGOs accountable. There's no election. The self-appointed NGO leaders, they get lots of donation. Sorry. So because of this, then we have seen that result, the worsening consequence, worsening situation of environmental disorder. That is the case, then there are lots of studies emphasizing state got lost control during this neoliberal reform last 30, 40 years. State become decentered, replaced by NGO, replaced by supranational organization. So state lost power. So there's a kind of concern that state should be brought back. They should be the leading actor in dealing with this particular problem, right? So, but question is, which state? State is necessary, but which state is the best? Is it capitalist, welfare state, liberal state, communist state, post-colonial state? What state would be appropriate to deal with this environmental, management? So, lots of studies that are trying to prioritize that capitalist state, for example, may not be really appropriate, but they are sometimes instrument of private capital. So they would not deal with lots of theoretical, empirical research in the last 150 years. We don't see anywhere in economics, neoclassical, classical, or Keynesian economics, we don't see environmental issue there. If you look at the communist system, the Communist Party is the main stakeholder. The state become instrument of Communist Party, ruling party. In America, it's different, corporate capital. As a result, so they don't have this balanced, manageable kind of configuration that can be effective. So let us look at the developmental state now. So developmental state actually has the beginning from 1982. That is Johnson's book, the last chapter of the book. It's quite complex idea. Developmental state is not that simple. So developmental state means, first of all, that there's a relationship between business sector and the state. It's different from capitalist economy. Development state is very capitalist, but the relationship between developmental state and market is very, very unique. That state has autonomy from any dominant class, especially business sector. But the state is very, interactive with the business sector without losing their autonomy. So it's very, very, then it was further extended by Peter Evans. He got embedded autonomy, state embedded in society, in community. The autonomy of the state and bureaucracy is embedded in society. There are lots of thick, dense relationship between state actors and society and community and business people. Tremendous good relationship. Then after that, followed by that, there are many other, I can put some name here. You can see that tremendous amount of studies conducted on Korea, on Japan, on Taiwan, and Singapore. Even in Latin America, like Brazil and Chile, even in Africa, South Africa and Ghana, for example, so developmental state. So even Third World Quarterly Journal, the whole issue was devoted to this special issue on developmental state. It's a very interesting idea. The first of all, we have to look at, so developmental state number one principle. They have long-term commitment to development, means economic growth. So economic growth through rapid industrialization, rapid business venture, they must grow fast as fast as possible, catching up. So catching up with the Western progress, they must have to move faster, right? So that is one of the issues, that development remains the fundamental agenda. Second consideration, that state restart the economy is interventionist. The state has to be interventionist. They have control and supervision over the business sector, but without constraining the market force, market competition. Then state bureaucracy, state public administration is deeply embedded in society, in business people. So there's a tremendous autonomy, yes, but this autonomy does not mean that they are quite free, 100%. They're tied up in social relationship. That's why they're accepted in society. So business class doesn't oppose state autonomy, bureaucratic autonomy, because they gain from them also bureaucracy and state as well in terms of helping. But the interesting part of this whole equation, which is difficult to really achieve, is that politics administration relationship, for example, in liberal democratic system is guided by political neutrality, politics administration dichotomy, separation. But under this state law, it's still meritocratic, it's still neutral, it's still scientific, everything good, rational. But the problem is that they cannot intervene in each other. Politics is politics, administration is administration. So they have this kind of coordination. Is not like dichotomy, the partnership between the political system and the administrative system. Cooperation, collaboration, no dichotomy, like American or British model. The British model, which actually is very global, all of us in Singapore, in India, everybody, British model is in Malaysia, everywhere. So, but in our developmental state model, the politics administration relationship is guided by this neutrality, yes, but no separation. Then business politics relationship, business state relationship. Yes, we help the business people, give them bank loan, give them guidance, give them advice, exactly risk taker, we can compensate them. At the same time, I relate to the business sector, but they cannot buy me. They cannot capture me. So no state capture. Remain separate, but mutual help. It's very difficult to achieve. It's very difficult, like look at this capitalist system, state become instrument of private capital often. But under developmental state, no. It cannot be instrument, it's interventionist. It guides the business sector, the formation of local capital basically. In Japan, Korea, for example, tremendous progress made in a short span of time. Some of the biggest corporation in Japan is based on this state-business relationship. Very, very successful. So, and this is a kind of model that is often glorified, often celebrated. Actually, it's a very interesting model for non-Western countries. So this is a development state model. Now, so which countries are development state? So some study shows that, first of all, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, these are the first order of developmental state. But some states are soft developmental state, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines. The soft is not really in the process of emerging. Then China, Vietnam, not sure, it's still debated. So there's lots of debate, controversy about exactly which states are developmental state. They must qualify the development orientation, political neutrality, at the same time, political partnership, business state relationship, they must qualify. Then they can claim they are really developmental state. Exactly. So since it is a conference on public administration professionalism, I would say it's always a little bit less relevant, but I must say the developmental state really conducive, very complementary for developing administrative professionalism. Because bureaucrats, the best talented people from best graduate from top university, highly meritocratic, no consideration of political affiliation, ethnicity, anything, pure meritocracy. At the same time, same public official also the main function is to develop the business relationship, helping the business to coordinate without being affected by this business sector interest. Helping the business sector without being affected by the business sector. They cannot really capture this bureaucrat. It's a very interesting model. So because of this, and politics and administration relationship, politics and administration, you can see tremendous amount of professionalism. But at the same time, they call it political leaders actually reign, R-E-I-G-N, reign, and bureaucrats rule. So they are very collaborative between each other without politicizing public administration, with bureaucratizing politics, without doing that. But they remain very tremendously interactive and collaborative. So development state for sustainable development, I would say that this China, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, these 4 developmental states, there are tremendous achievement they made. But beginning of this developmental state, 1960s, 70s, for example, their main philosophy, grow fast, clean later. The environment is not important. You have to grow as fast as possible. Because of this tremendous priority given, fast growth, fast economic development based on rapid industrialization, urbanization, export-led, export-oriented production. So they develop very fast. But after some time, the civil society, then citizens as a whole, they did not want it anymore. It's tremendous suffering for people. They have already some income, good income. So they say their main preference is better have a clean environment, sustainable development become number 1. Because of this, government also realized that it's necessary. That's why whole East Asian countries began to embrace this sustainable development. And situation since then has improved, and they come to a kind of point, the transition from developmental state to eco-developmental state. Previously, they neglected environmental issues. Now they're embracing. I have some actually record here about which country like China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, who has done what in recent years to protect environment, to ensure sustainable development, and so on. It's very interesting development. Japan, for example, recycle 100% everything, recycling that introduced. China introduced new law, new institution. South Korea also very, very advanced in doing that. So because of all this, I would say that developmental state did transit from its original development state model that was less sensitive to environmental issue, now more concerned about this, because public concern, also outside pressure, international pressure. So they have to really take into account the sustainable development issue. And they did quite good, made good progress, right? So what are the advantage of developmental state to achieve this sustainable development mission? First of all, I can use this same original text of Johnson and Evans, original formulation of developmental state. We can use that argument to explain exactly how developmental state is conducive for sustainable development. Number 1, the state's relationship with the market. Under this system, under this model of the state has to really become very closely linked with the market. They provide advice to the market. They provide financial support, but at the same time, state remain in control. So Johnson said how they do it in Japan. They separate in the private sector, separate ownership from management. Ownership owned by private individual, private company, private family, but management is different within the private sector. So management is supervised by the state. It is pure market competition. It's a pure capitalist system. At the same time, the state is interventionist, it has in control. Right, this is one of the things, and that can be very helpful for environmental management because main stakeholders that is responsible for this environmental disorder is the manufacturing company, production, consumption. This is basically market. So market is, state can guide them, advise them. They listen to the political elite and bureaucratic elite. That is very effective compared to, say, the separation between the market and the state in other state formation. So it's very interesting that the state has densely related social, kind of relationship. They interact with the private market quite regularly. By doing so, kind of network between the political leaders, bureaucrats, and the private sector. That's why, so they're very effective in guiding the market to produce green product, green consumption to ensure that the state is quite effective to guide this environment-friendly mode of production and consumption, what kind of material they use, what they produce, that can be guided by the state. Second consideration is that bureaucratic organization under developmental state, also they have autonomy from society, from business class, but they have this guiding principle. They advise the business people, enterprise or entrepreneurs, but without being bought by the business sector, very separate. Autonomy is tremendous. It's very, so that's why one scholar, especially I think it was Evans, emphasized that you must have two preconditions to qualify developmental state. You must have autonomy, at the same time embeddedness. You're autonomous, but you don't relate to people and society. So developmental state means the bureaucrats, public administration people have to embed it in society at the same time autonomous, because the business cannot affect them. You cannot buy them through, it can lead to corruption, right? And third, and because of this, so there's a kind of, state has that capacity and avenue to guide, so they can justify their action. People accept it because there has this relationship, close relationship. And final part is that so environmental management requires state capacity. And developmental state capacity is very high. It's interventionist, autonomous, bureaucrats are highly capable, the talented people. So tremendous amount of multiple factors that make public bureaucracy highly capable, so high capacity. And for this, I think environmental management can be quite, useful, appropriate to have this, to adopt this developmental state model. So because of this, I would say that overall conclusion is that, so developmental state is really, really complex subject. We need to understand very carefully. And many of the state claims that, yes, we are developmental state. Actually, they are not. So we have to qualify those basic 4 or 5 factors. And then there's a kind of realization, I would say, and this is a very conducive for environmental sustainability. All right, but there could be variation among those states, lots of divergence. Some countries, bureaucratic autonomy is more than others. Some countries, business sector interaction with the state is often problematic. So there's lots of divergence also. So basically that is the kind, that's the things I wanted to say. And I would say it'd be nice to have, your query or question so that, I can respond, if I can. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Hux, explaining us about the essence of the the kind of developmental states are kind of the very interesting combination of the interactiveness and autonomy, or the embeddedness and autonomy, and the applicability of that kind of mechanism, not just for the economic development, but also for the environmental management. Okay, so we'd like to have some interaction with the audience. So anyone who has question, please raise your hand. Okay, I can identify 4 here. So maybe I'd like to take first 2 questions first, then after that, another 2 questions. So yes, so beginning with, yes, please.
Thank you very much. I most appreciate, I enjoyed the presentation by Professor Heck. But again, I want to take you back to certain perspectives that maybe come from our own continent, the African continent. Listening and considering the centralized interventionist role of the developmental state, we understand, even the example you gave, Ghana and South Africa from the African continent, these are some of the states that are tending towards developmental or are. But sometimes we find that some of these countries don't have a capacitated bureaucracy, state bureaucracy. In other words, some of the institutions are not resilient enough. And one of the issues you talked about is there shouldn't be excessive political interference. That happens in many African countries. So if that is the case, how can public administration generally, or public administrators, prevent a situation where there will be collusion or even a coalition of political and the business class to engage in state capture, which happens in African countries? And therefore, it can even lead to backsliding of democracy. What strategies can be adopted?
Yeah,
Okay,
I think actually...
Can I just I take
sure,
one more
sure.
question then after that? Yes, please, yeah.
Good morning, my name is Rashad Bani Samari. I am from Benin and I'm a graduate student at the American University in Cairo. Thank you so very much, Professor, for your lecture. Very, very interesting. So in the first part of your lecture, you were actually trying to understand why there is an underperformance in international conventions, protocols, and institutions in addressing some of the issues when it comes to climate change. And to a certain extent, I would say we've got everything right on paper. And you've tried to explain also why it's not working. But don't you think that, as you mentioned, those international institutions are made up of other institutions, and institutions are made up by stakeholders, as you mentioned in your lecture? Do you think that those individual stakeholders are giving priority to the issues that they form coalitions on? This is number one. If you think that they are not giving priority, don't you think that in a certain extent also, people with high interest but low power are not part of these institutions? And if yes, how do you think that you empower those with high interest and low power within those international and national institutions in order to drive a certain agenda? So this is one. And two, while speaking about the developmental state, you've mentioned at a couple of points interventionist approach. And in Japan, there was this window guidance, which was adopted by the central bank after the World War in order to guide private sector development and drive growth. In today's developmental direction, particularly when it comes to economic theory, where do you see these developmental state models fitting with the IMF, the World Bank, that have their own perceptions and agenda when it comes to supporting development in Africa? I have other questions, but I should give the floor to others.
Okay, thank you very much for the 2 questions.
All
Then,
right,
yes,
so
please.
hopefully I will remember. So all right, so the first question is about Ghana, South Africa. Those countries, their developmental state model is not very credible because their public administration, public bureaucracy is not guided by neutrality autonomy, and so on. I think that's why, read Ivan's book, very interesting. He tried to compare Brazil, India, and South Korea. And he said South Korea qualifies as a developmental state, but other state is predatory state. Kind of the state is captured by this vested interest. They're alliance with the political leaders, bureaucrats, public officials. So bureaucrats are not autonomous. Discretion they don't have to be neutral, to move away. We advise you, but you can bribe the bureaucrat to make decision in your favor. That's why I say there's a kind of challenge. How do we really can get that kind of public administration system, pure based on meritocracy, neutrality, based on qualification, achievement, and so on, no other consideration. At the same time, these bureaucrats are embedded in society. They are not detached 100% like British model, American model. They are really, really embedded. So society understand. They accept their decision quite much more easily. So because of this, it's very difficult, I would say, in case of African countries or even most of the Asian countries. It's very difficult to develop this. There could be some other factor, like, for example, Confucian ethics. Confucian values, the origin of meritocracy goes back to Confucian time. There's a kind of, Han Dynasty. It was there about 300 years BC. And so because of this, it's much earlier than British administration. Even British model introduced meritocracy in India first, 1853. And in British itself, in their own country, introduced 1 year later, 1854. It's not called trivial report. That's why, because of all this, I would say that also we cannot plan certain things. Which political party will win the election, certain things beyond control. You can control, train bureaucrat, but state formation, political party, these are beyond any training, any control, any planning. It happened automatically. The Singapore government had this very nice political leaders 1965, 1959. But this kind of, it just happened, destiny, just like happened, it's there. You cannot create this kind of political system artificially. Okay, development strategy is good, so we must follow. Africa decide. It's very difficult. Because it's happened just that way. So legitimacy is guided by different consideration. So because of this, we cannot universalize. There's no single model. So there is no one-size-fits-all approach. So divergence, even within developmental state, Brazil, Chile, for example, very different. Argentina, different. And South Africa is different from Ghana or Botswana, so different. So that's why we cannot say, okay, since development state is good, we must have it. So we cannot do that. The politics is something different. In Japan, it happened after World War II. It happened in Korea. It happened in Singapore. But it's difficult to really kind of make a universal model and apply to certain country. Right? It's very, very difficult. Now, the second question is about sustainable development. There are lots of actors involved, right? So institution built for sustainable development to achieve sustainable development goals. But it is possible that institutions are guided by the composition of the institute, the constituent members of the institute. They have their own interest. I would say in public policy, although we try to make public policy scientific, neutral, cost-benefit, analysis, but there is no system in the world where public policy maker has no vested interest. It's a kind of, it's automatically prejudice, bias, interest. We can minimize, but it's very difficult to make 100% neutral. It's human being after all. So because of that, those joining international institutions, they have vested interest, of course. All the international institutions, whether United Nations, World Bank, IMF, WTO, any institution, UNDP, for example, those join the organization, human being, the decision is guided by both their own background, own interest, even the perception, perspective they come with, it affects decision-making process in organizations. So that's why it's very difficult to really neutralize that kind of capturing this institution by certain vested interests. Very difficult. But at least there should be. Good thing about a state, a democratic state, is that if there is some wrongdoing, there's a corruption or cronyism in state, the election time they can be voted out. But international organization problem is that often it's difficult to really change. Even NGO, most of the NGO leaders are not elected or appointed by Public Service Commission. They suddenly, yeah, I'm a rich person, I open an NGO to help poor farmer, to help small children. So sometimes people tax evasion. I open NGOs just to evade tax, for example, income tax. So there could be many reasons. That's why at least there should be mechanism of accountability. At least government has that means that they're elected, they have to listen to people. If they don't listen, next election they'll be automatically voted out. But many of the organizations are too permanent. Often there is no democratic process. Very difficult to introduce that, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe first I'd like to take 2 or 3 questions from the center, then moving to this side. So first, please.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Professor, for your presentation. My name is Rosenda Hendrikse. I'm from the University of Pretoria in South Africa. So I hear South Africa is being labeled a possible developmental state. So I was wondering what kind of lessons we can learn from the Asian tigers, for example, because when we look at theory, it says that there should be an interplay between the business elite and the political elite, for example. But if we look at South Africa at the moment, there's a total collapse of all the state-owned enterprises, especially the Electricity Supply Commission. So how do you build a strong economy if you have invested all the resources, the economic resources, into building an economy that is based on you need electricity for the economy to run? And at the moment, we have constant load shedding, extending over 6 hours, 4 hours, 2 hours, and it impacts every aspect of our lives, whether we are in politics, in business, in academia. So what lessons could we possibly learn? Because in my opinion, we are so far removed from being a developmental state, so I don't even, let me rather just stop there. So what lessons can we possibly learn if you are mooting the idea that there should be this interplay between politics and business where the state is actually so corrupt? And you say we can vote a new political party for a new political party in the next elections, but the African National Congress is the dominant party, so unless there are very good coalitions, I don't know how we're going to get that party out of politics at the moment.
Thank you. And one more question. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Dr. Shakil Adwan. I'm assistant professor from Yarmouk University in Jordan. معلش عندي 3 أسئلة رئيسية أو 3 ملاحظات رئيسية ترتبط في موضوع التنمية وموضوع الحكومة. الجميع يعلم في الإدارة العامة أن هناك تحول كبير جدا في مفاهيم الشراكة ما بين القطاعين العام والخاص، وحضرتك بروفيسور طرحت 3 أفكار رئيسية للتحول إلى الدول التنموية، من ضمنها استقلالية نسبية للقطاع العام في التعامل مع القطاع الخاص. أيضا طرحت موضوع الإشراف والتأثير على الخطط الاستثمارية للقطاع الخاص والشركات، وأن يكون هنالك إدارة يعني حصيفة تدير هاي السياسات الوطنية. كثير من دول العالم اليوم، في دول العالم الثالث تحديدا، يبنوا سياسات حاليا بداية السنة ونهاية السنة الماضية في موضوع التحول المناخي. تم رصد موازنات كبيرة والكل يعلم هذه الموازنات، والآن دول العالم الثالث تحاول أن تستفيد فقط من هذه الأموال. راجعت السنة هذه سياسة للتغير المناخي في المملكة الأردنية الهاشمية، وزعت على أساتذة الجامعات ووزعت على بعض متخذي القرار. حقيقة جزء كبير من الآليات والموجودة فيها لا تخدم المرحلة القادمة، ويعني صعب تحقيقها. فكثير من الدول اليوم تحاول أنها تحقق أهداف للتنمية، لكن هي موجودة خطط كثيرة، موجودة حبر على ورق، ولكن آليات التنفيذ غير موجودة. قوانين الاستثمارية في دول العالم الثالث موجودة، لكن كيفية آلية التطبيق، كثير من دول العالم الثالث لديها قوانين استثمار قد تكون أفضل من الدول المتقدمة، لكن المشكلة في التطبيق. قضية أنه يكون موضوع التنمية موضوع مركزي في القطاع الحكومي أعتقد صعبة لسبب. اليوم اقتصاديات الدول العالم الثالث لو أخذنا مثلا بعض دول الشرق الأوسط، القطاع الحكومي يعني غير قادر على إنتاج وظائف، وبالتالي تحولنا من مبدأ التوظيف لمبدأ التشغيل، وبالتالي لابد أن نعطي الفرصة الأكبر للقطاع الخاص. أعتقد أنه يجب أنه يدعم القطاع الخاص ضمن تشريعات ناظمة للعمل، ونراقب على عمل القطاع الخاص ولا نتدخل في عمل القطاع الخاص. نكون إحنا ريجوليتر، إحنا نضع السياسات العامة، والقطاع الخاص ينفذ ضمن آليات وضمن هذه القوانين. شكرا. مداخلة أكثر من سؤال. شكرا. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you. Yes, first of all, I would say in response to the first question about South Africa developmental state, it's very precarious because lots of political influence, political interaction, politicization of public administration, public bureaucracy, and election comes. Often election could be guided by vote buying, sometimes corrupt practices within the election process. So there could be lots of deviations from ideal type politics and our public administration. I would say, as I said before, number one, we cannot 100% glorify and celebrate developmentalism. That could be any problem also. So developmental state often authoritarian tendency, often political control is more severe sometimes. Japanese democracy, but sometimes in South Korea or Taiwan, for example, the way it was handled often it is not very democratic. That's why often is a kind of economic gain and political cost. We have to really make a kind of trade-off between the two sometimes. This is one. So that's also South Africa or Ghana or any country in Africa, whether they should embrace this developmental state model. We're not developmental state model. We want to claim to be a developmental state. The question is why, number one. Number two, as I said at the beginning, with the first question previously, that certain things you cannot really emulate, imitate, or really prescribe. Because the reason is that certain things it just happen automatically. The political power is not like administrative power. Election, sometimes people get elected, illiterate, political, very popular, illiterate, no qualification, nothing, but people love the person. Election time comes, they're elected. That's why you cannot plan certain things. That's why South Africa, not developmental state model, fully not developmental state, then definitely the question is whether they should. How do you do it? Can you really pursue, professionalize, impersonalize public bureaucracy? How to do it? This kind of society, context, history, culture, belief system all come together. It's human being, after all. Bureaucrats are political leaders are human beings, so they inherit their own tradition, own religion, when religious background also affect. That's why it's very difficult to really, as I said before, we cannot really universalize this model. That's why we have to really accept certain things, but certain things we can do, like bureaucracy, how to train them to be neutral, train them to be impersonal as much as possible. There's a training process, but there's no guarantee it will be effective. Second question is very interesting. It's actually very, very interesting, I would say, for it is relevant to this discussion. The first of all, yes, tremendous amount of change in public administration. 30, 40 years, since 1980s onward, because of the transnational capital become globalized, the pressure on every government, this is interest of transnational capital corporations. You have to open up, liberalize, privatize, outsource, everything from partnership is part of the whole new liberal, new conservative kind of pressure. And it was mediated by World Bank, IMF, and so on. Many poor countries had to, privatize school, public hospital, for example. That's why tremendous amount of change. But remember, that led to change in developmental states themselves. Singapore, they now call it neoliberal developmental state. Now, Japan, remember Koizumi, the prime minister, he embraced this kind of pro-market reform in pension and postal service and so on. He became very unpopular. People did not like it. Same thing happened in China and Vietnam. They privatized public health. They realized that many of the people have no health access. They eventually reversed the policy. Because of this, I would say, and this is not developmental state, it's basically public-private partnership. Yes, you can form, but that partnership is not the same like developmental state partnership. There is conflict of interest. I form partnership with you, with mutual interest is not allowed in developmental state. You partner, you advise, you consult, interact without being affected. Autonomy, that is the kind of, it's very difficult to achieve. The bureaucrats, talented, meritocratic, autonomous, but the advising the business people and coordinating the whole country's business investment and everything, which is very effective in Japan, but without being affected by bureaucratic business interest. They're not affected by that. It's very difficult to achieve. That's why I would say this partnership we're talking about, that public-private partnership, every country doing it is very good. But actually that partnership is not the same as the developmental state model. Yeah. That's why.
Okay, yeah, please.
Yeah, it's very difficult to really a kind of, copy or restructure the politics and administration, a relation with the business. It's very difficult to, often it happened historically, it just happens. So that's why, but we can try, learn from example of South Korea or Japan, Taiwan or Singapore, some example exactly how they did it, what is the achievement, what is any cost, any negative consequence or not, for example. So we can learn from them, yeah. Then we can decide.
Yeah, thank you very much. But I'm very sorry, but we are running of time, so
Okay.
already.
Thank you very much.
And launching to the lunchtime. So
thank you very much.
Sorry,
Thank you.
I'm sorry very much for the question from this side, but I'd like to close this session now. And I think that Professor Hak's argument is very interesting argument about the developmental state theory and its general applicability, but also this can be a very interesting criteria to judge a different type of partnership as we discussed for the recent issue. And also maybe that kind of framework is helpful to assess academically the kind of the collaborative governance and so on, so how to be interactive and how to keep distance, a very general insight is giving us. So thank you very much,
Thank
Professor Hak.
you for sharing for me. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So from the administration side, any idea about when we will have the next session? Or? Yeah, okay.
I'd like to take a picture and give you a small token of